Today, I have the honor of speaking with pianist Anne-Marie McDermott. Anne-Marie has played concertos, recitals, and chamber music in hundreds of cities throughout the US, Europe, and Asia for over 25 years. Her recordings include repertoire from Prokofiev, Bach, Haydn, and Gershwin, and she tours extensively as a soloist and with multiple ensembles. The Friends of Chamber Music are delighted to share her Artist Series program from the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, featuring two stunning pieces by Mozart and Smetana. Greetings, Anne-Marie. It is a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
My pleasure to be with you. Thank you, Lacie. I'm truly honored and so look forward to our conversation. This was such a fun program that we'll be discussing, so I can't wait to discuss it and share it with everybody.
Oh, great. I'm excited too. So much beautiful music on this. So let's jump in. In the first piece, the Mozart Concerto, the seriousness of this concerto is so uncharacteristic of Mozart. Yes. We typically don't associate such ominous music with him. As a pianist, you've undoubtedly played an abundance of Mozart's work. So I'm curious, how do you approach this serious side of Mozart? Is your approach any different than when you play pieces by him that are more characteristic of his style?
It's a great question, Lacie. Yes, I do approach this differently. You know, I'm in the midst in recent years of recording all of the Mozart piano concerti. So I really feel like I'm deeply inside this music and Mozart's writing style with the concerti. And you're absolutely right. This concerto in D minor, he didn't write too many concerti in a minor key. And when Mozart's in a minor key, something happens to him emotionally, or to his music, I should say. And this, right off the bat with this piece of music, you can feel this kind of unsettled, darker, almost tumultuous side of Mozart, you know, and I love exploring this side of Mozart. It's very, very rich. And yes, does my style change when I'm playing a more, a darker side of Mozart, Mozart's genius, I should say? It does. And it does in the sense that I generally use a slightly weightier touch at the piano. You know, if I'm trying to play happier or more joyful, vibrant Mozart, then sometimes I feel like, you know, I'm kind of pulling the sound out of the piano. Yeah. And with this concerto, I want the sound to be a little bit darker, a little bit richer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, one of the moments that stands out to me in this piece is the entrance of the piano after the orchestral introduction. There's so much contrast, that so much greater than just solo instrument versus ensemble. The piano part here is so delicate in contrast to the orchestra. So what do you think about this moment in the piece? What effect do you want this entrance to have on the audience?
Great question. It's a magical moment, you know, and the thing about the opening tutti, whether it's with a full orchestra or whether it's with this ensemble that I performed it with, it's a big opening. It's a big opening tutti. And like you say, the piano comes in with just a single line. I think Mozart can never get that far away from opera. And so I think I can feel what it feels like. So I think of it as being, you know, very operatic, and also it's very personal and it's very tender. Now, it doesn't stay that way for too long, right? It's just that opening piano entrance. I always feel like, you know, the opening tutti is so complete, and that I want to announce myself. And in this more gentle, intimate way, but I want to, just with that first octave, I just want to say, hey, everything's changed right now, and I'm here now. And then, you know, whatever, 16 bars later, he plunges us right back into this tumultuous feeling. But the whole first movement really goes back and forth between those two characteristics that you identified, right? The more stormy side, and then the more intimate, gentle, almost operatic side.
Yes. Yes. I love that you brought up the operatic side. That's going to give us so much when we listen to your concert, and we can be listening for that singing style.
Yes.
that comes in there. So
Exactly.
excellent. Well, cadenzas also play a role, and they are so delightful for performers and listeners alike. So I wonder, are there particular moments in the cadenzas in this piece that stand out to you, and specific instances that you really want your audience to grasp?
Oh boy, that is a rich, wonderful question. What I love so much, and all of my piano colleagues feel the same way, we're so grateful to Mr. Beethoven for loving this concerto so much that he wrote cadenzas. He wrote multiple cadenzas, right? The cadenzas that I play are the typical cadenzas. They're the most popular, I should say, for good reason. So what should people listen for? The first movement cadenza is an epic musical statement by itself. What I love is right away the piano comes in with a set of 3 trills. That's very unusual that you start a cadenza trilling,
Right.
you know, and so I think what that does, hopefully, grabs people's attention. They're like, ooh, like you sit back and you really want to listen. Beethoven's genius comes through in the first movement cadenza, where he really takes us, and this is really the point of a cadenza. Beethoven did it so brilliantly, takes us through all the key moments in the first movement, and it really finds that combination of the more intimate operatic writing, and also a whole lot of storminess and unsettled feeling. So it's really quite, when this cadenza starts, everybody should just sit back and you're in for a ride with that, with the first movement cadenza. You know, the last movement cadenza is so incredibly well suited for the last movement. The last movement's pretty fiery and very fast and fleeting. And the cadenza in the third movement is not terribly long, but it kind of takes your breath away. You know, and there's a whole section later in the cadenza where it's just filled with this long passage of trills. It's very difficult. You know, usually you're not trilling for that long, but Beethoven really took advantage of that for such dramatic effect. And the end of the third movement cadenza so inevitably brings us back to the theme of the third movement. Again, before the ensemble even joins me, I play the theme one final time, but this time the theme ends in a diminished chord, almost setting up this anticipation of what will follow. And what follows is the coda. I wish I could sit down and have dinner with Mozart. The coda, after such a stormy concerto, all of a sudden he makes the coda of the third movement in D major. So all of a sudden you have the major key, and there's this brightness and this innocence after everything the concerto has gone through, and it just ends in a flourish.
Right. It's almost as if Mozart is saying, "Don't worry, I'm still what you have expected from me, or what you've come to know about me and my optimism." And you know, he's just shown us a different side of him.
Absolutely, I love that. Actually, I really do. And it's just, he doesn't leave us in that dark, stormy place. Yeah. He lets us end with and have a smile on our face.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Oh, so wonderful. And what more can you ask for a Beethoven composed, written cadenzas in a Mozart concerto? I mean, it's a musician's dream, right?
It really is. It really is. You know, and this arrangement of this Mozart concerto, a dear colleague of mine, Tara Helen O'Connor, brilliant flute player, she told me about this arrangement. I didn't know about it. This arrangement's done by Carl Czerny, and Carl Czerny is really best known to pianists as writing books of etudes. Right. We all have to play Czerny etudes when we're a kid, so we don't necessarily have the most beloved feeling towards Carl Czerny. Yes. But Tara told me about this arrangement, and I was skeptical at first because it is such a big concerto. And is this really going to be able to work with string quartet, double bass, and one flute player? And I was absolutely bowled over by how brilliantly it works. Yeah. And there's something about being able to play this concerto with a smaller ensemble like this that gives all of us the ability to be a little more flexible, to bring a little more of a chamber music feeling into the concerto, so you're really hearing every line going on, and there's a lot of conversation and communication going on between all of us.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm so glad that you shared that information about the difference between the arrangement. And, you know, it is hard as a pianist to think of Czerny in any other in any other way than, you know, making sure that you get your etudes ready for piano lessons. So
exactly. It's all about training the fingers.
Exactly.
But clearly there was another side of Czerny.
Yeah.
And I don't know the history of what inspired him to do this arrangement, but I bet you it was probably based on, back in that day, we didn't have orchestras all over the place. So a lot of repertoire could not get played because there weren't full orchestras around. And a lot of concerts were taking place in people's salons or their living rooms, right? There were soirees with wine and great music. And this was a way to get this music heard more. And so I am guessing that would have been his inspiration.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's look at the Smetana.
Yeah.
So if the Mozart Concerto had us yearning for this heart-wrenching romanticism, the Smetana Trio in G minor surely satisfies that desire. It is such a beautiful piece that Smetana gives us some 70 years after the Mozart Concerto, and the heartache that's in this trio is so palpable. We know that Smetana wrote this after the death of one of his young daughters, and the piece offers contrasting moods of grief, hope, nostalgia, remembrance. What are some of the moments that stand out to you? And as an ensemble, what were some of the moments that you collectively wanted to enhance?
So beautifully worded description of this Smetana trio. This is not a piece that's really in the mainstream of the chamber music repertoire. It should be. It is so unique. And one of the very, very special things about this particular performance of it was that I was working with two colleagues who I admire so, so much for decades and who I've worked with quite a bit, Ida Kavafian and Gary Hoffman. So right off the bat, before we played a note, I knew this was going to be an incredibly special and rich experience because they're both very profound musicians. And so we spent a lot of time just even talking about the piece before we played, and to try and capture everything that you were just describing. You think about the circumstances in which this piece was written, and it can just tear your heart out. But what's so inspiring to me is that Smetana also finds joy and innocence and beauty and glorified passion throughout the piece. It's very unusual in its structure in that it starts with a violin cadenza. There are cadenzas for all three instruments throughout. And you don't get that in a piano trio usually. There's a couple of piano cadenzas that almost sound a little Chopin-esque, you know, just filled with rubato and just so beautiful. So I think what we tried to capture are the tremendous emotional contrasts in this piece. And the first movement just goes through so much. There's two marches in the middle of the first movement, and then interspersed with these cadenzas and this kind of over the top singing out of the melodic line. It's very it's both passionate but possibly a little bit what's the word, desperate, a little bit in its need to just, you know, scream out this melody double forte. You know, and then the second movement is just so unrelated to the first movement and kind of delicate with these two interspersed trio sections that vary tremendously from each other. You know, and then the third movement is very difficult because as the pianist, you have to have like two brains at the same time, because the left hand is doing triplets, da 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 da. The right hand's doing duplets, da 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 da. So it's really it's such an interesting, fun thing. You have to practice the hands a lot separately, so they're very independent, and then you just have to trust.
Right.
But, later in the third movement, everything kind of comes to a grinding halt, and you hear a funeral march.
Yeah.
And what's extraordinary is time stops. You hear this, you're drawn into this in a very powerful, heartfelt way. And at the end of the funeral march, there's a low rumbling in the piano and a big flourishing scale. And then every time I play this piece, I get the chills at this moment, because then it goes into G major and it's just this exhilarating music, so it's a very emotional piece. As you said, this particular performance was maybe even more emotional, just because of the bond that myself and Ida and Gary Hoffman have with each other. I think we brought that to the music.
Yeah. What a beautiful description. You gave me goosebumps, just your description of the ending there. And hearing about the emotional preparation that it took between the three of you. And then, you were talking about the technical preparation that you had to do. So there's just so much in the piece that you have to prepare for emotionally and physically, because it's exhausting in both ways.
Absolutely. That's such a great word. And I think if the performers aren't exhausted at the end of performing this piece, they didn't give enough of themselves, because you're absolutely right. You finish this piece and you're just spent. Yeah. And, this trio in particular really requires a tremendous amount of trust between the performers, because like you say, it's kind of all over the map. It stops, it starts. You have to capture the character of each section instantly. Yeah. So you really have to have a plan. And it's very, as you mentioned, it's also very technically demanding. It's almost like a concerto for all three of us.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a piece. And you're right. It should be in the repertoire more prominently, because it's just a gorgeous piece.
It absolutely is. Right. So and I just find it miraculous that Smetana, with everything that he had gone through before writing this piece, could find this magic and this joy and this innocence. That's what a great artist to be able to do that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Oh, thank you so much for just sharing your insight on both of these pieces and your experience with them. It's going to give, as we listen to your concert, just that added insight for us, getting to hear your background on it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lacie. As you can tell, well, first of all, you're a joy to speak with.
Oh, well, thank you.
You are. And I love being able to talk to audiences about the music, and because we as musicians, we spend so much time so inside it, and to be able to share some of what we think about is really fun. And I think hopefully draws audiences even closer to the music.
Yes, I think so. I mean, just in our conversation in these last few minutes, I feel already a closer connection with it. And so I know as I go back and listen again, I'm going to listen now with a different perspective. I'm really grateful for. So this has just been a fantastic time of conversation with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I appreciate it so much. Is there anything else you would like to share? Do you have any upcoming projects or things we should be on the lookout for?
Well, thank you for asking. It's so wonderful that, this fall concerts are coming back in a bigger way. And I think I keep saying to my colleagues and even to audiences, I wish we could bottle the feelings right now, because the gratitude and the exhilaration is just so wonderfully over the top. And so, I have, last spring, I had volume 4 of my Mozart Piano Concerti released on Bridge Records. And in about a month, the next volume will be coming out.
Oh, great.
And I did a wonderful project last spring that was really kind of perfect in retrospect. The timing of doing this project, because things were still a little quiet in concert performance life. And I decided to record 2 of Schubert's most profound sonatas at this Troy Music Hall in upstate New York, a divine recording location. And we had 5 days, and all I thought about for 5 days was Schubert and what I was going to eat. And and so that's coming out, I think, November 19th, this recording, and I'm proud of it. And I feel like there was something about recording Schubert during a difficult time, I think, that we were able to capture. So yeah, those are like the most prescient projects right now.
Oh, they sound fantastic. So we will definitely look for the one coming out in November, and also go back and listen. So thank you so much for sharing.
My pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, before we sign off, I just want to wish you the best in health and happiness, and in the upcoming season that we're about to enter. And
thank you.
So it was from
Same to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lacie.
All right. Bye-bye.